Roman mothers used his name to frighten their children for generations. Long after the wars were over, long after Carthage was ash, the name Hannibal Barca still made Roman blood run cold. He was not simply a great general. He was the general who took the most powerful military machine the ancient world had ever produced, Rome at the absolute peak of its power, and broke it, battle after battle, for 15 years, on Roman soil, with an army he had marched across the Alps. He remains, 2,000 years later, the most studied military commander in history. And he never lost a single battle in Italy. Not one. Carthage was Rome's equal, and Rome's terror. A great maritime empire stretching across the North African coast, into Spain, and across the islands of the western Mediterranean. Rich beyond calculation, with a navy that controlled the sea lanes and an army that had never been decisively defeated. When Hannibal was born in 247 BC, Carthage and Rome were already locked in a war that would define the ancient world. He was born into that war. He never left it. This is the story of a boy who swore an oath of eternal hatred toward Rome at the age of 9 and spent his entire life keeping it. Who crossed the Alps with war elephants when everyone said it was impossible. Who shattered Roman army after Roman army on Italian soil. Who brought the greatest empire on earth to the edge of total collapse, and whose tactical genius is still studied in military academies around the world today. Hannibal Barca. The man who made Rome tremble. And the proof that one mind, burning with absolute purpose, can move the world. Hannibal was the son of Hamilcar Barca, the greatest Carthaginian general of his generation, the man who had fought Rome to a standstill in Sicily before politics forced a peace he considered a betrayal. Hamilcar burned with unfinished business. When 9-year-old Hannibal begged to accompany him to the new campaign in Spain, his father agreed on one condition. Hannibal had to swear on the sacred altar a solemn oath of eternal enmity toward Rome. The boy placed his hand on the stone and swore without hesitation. He would spend the next 50 years keeping that oath with every breath in his body. Spain was Hamilcar's project, a new Carthaginian empire to replace what had been lost to Rome in Sicily and Sardinia. Rich in silver and manpower, Spain could fund and fill an army capable of challenging Rome again. Hannibal grew up in the Spanish campaigns, learning war not in classrooms but in the field, at his father's side. He watched Hamilcar manage different peoples, different languages, different loyalties, holding together a multinational force through a combination of charisma, justice, and absolute military competence. He absorbed everything. He was being educated for exactly one purpose. When Hamilcar died in battle in 228 BC and his son-in-law Hasdrubal took command, Hannibal served under him, learning, watching, waiting. When Hasdrubal was assassinated in 221 BC, the army did something remarkable. Without consulting Carthage, the soldiers elected Hannibal as their commander. He was 26 years old. He had never commanded an army. Within 2 years he had conquered most of Spain, built his forces to a fighting strength beyond anything Hamilcar had achieved, and triggered the war with Rome that he had been preparing for his entire life. Hannibal's strategic plan was breathtaking in its audacity. He could not attack Rome by sea. Rome's ally Massilia controlled the western Mediterranean coast and Rome's navy was powerful. He could not simply invade from Africa. Carthage's politicians would not support a direct naval assault. So he conceived something that no one in the ancient world had ever attempted. He would march his army from Spain, through Gaul, across the Alps, and invade Italy from the north. He would carry the war to Rome's doorstep. He would fight on Roman soil. The army he assembled for the march was extraordinary. 90,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry, and 37 African war elephants. Multiple nationalities, Iberians, Libyans, Numidians, Gauls, each with different fighting styles that Hannibal had learned to combine into something greater than any of them individually. His Numidian cavalry were the finest light horsemen in the ancient world. His Libyan infantry were rock-solid veterans. His Iberian warriors were ferociously brave. He had spent years welding them into a single instrument. Now he was about to use it. The march from Spain to the Rhone River took 3 months. Hannibal fought through hostile Gallic tribes, managed supply lines across hundreds of miles, and performed the extraordinary logistical feat of crossing the Rhone, including the elephants, on rafts and improvised bridges. He was a brilliant logistician as well as a brilliant tactician. Every detail of the march had been planned. What came next could not have been fully planned. The Alps were ahead. The crossing of the Alps in autumn 218 BC is one of the most extraordinary military achievements in human history. No army had ever done it. The Romans considered it impossible. The mountain passes were controlled by hostile Gallic tribes who attacked the column from above, rolling boulders down onto men and elephants below. The paths were barely wide enough for a single man. The drops were lethal. The cold was killing. Hannibal lost half his army in the crossing. Of the 90,000 men who left Spain, 45,000 reached Italy. Many of the precious war elephants died in the cold, only a handful survived the descent into Italy. The soldiers who survived were frostbitten, exhausted, starving, and on the far side of an impassable mountain range from any reinforcement or retreat. They stood at the edge of the Po Valley in northern Italy, looking down at the Roman heartland below them. Hannibal turned to his men and told them they were not at the beginning of hardship. They were at the end of it. Italy was below. Everything they needed was there for the taking. The psychological impact on Rome was immediate and devastating. Roman strategic planning had assumed the Alps were an impassable barrier. They had not garrisoned the north because no army could come from that direction. When the news reached Rome that a Carthaginian army had descended from the Alps and was advancing through the Po Valley, the Senate did not panic. They were Roman senators, they did not panic publicly. But they understood, in that moment, that they were facing a commander unlike any they had encountered before. They sent their best general north immediately. He was not enough. At the Battle of Trebia in December 218 BC, Hannibal destroyed his first Roman army. The Roman general Sempronius Longus was experienced and capable. Hannibal made him irrelevant. He sent his Numidian cavalry to harass the Roman camp at dawn, drawing the Romans out into the freezing cold before they had eaten breakfast. He had his men eat first. The Romans crossed an icy river in the December cold, hungry and already shivering, and walked into a battle that Hannibal had already decided. At Lake Trasimene in June 217 BC, Hannibal performed the greatest ambush in ancient history. He hid his entire army, 40,000 men, in the hills above a narrow path between the lake and the high ground. He waited for the Roman consul Flaminius to march his army through the gap in early morning fog. When the last Roman soldier entered the corridor, Hannibal closed both ends simultaneously. 15,000 Romans died in 3 hours. Flaminius was killed. The survivors were pushed into the lake and drowned. Rome lost an entire army without knowing it was in a battle until it was already over. Rome received the news of Trasimene in stunned silence followed by organized hysteria. 2 armies destroyed in 6 months. The consul was dead. Hannibal was loose in Italy with a battle-hardened army that had beaten everything Rome had sent against it. The Senate appointed a dictator, Quintus Fabius Maximus, and gave him emergency powers. Fabius understood immediately that Rome could not beat Hannibal in open battle. His strategy was to avoid engagement, harass the flanks, cut the supply lines, starve the army out. It was the right strategy. Rome refused to follow it. In 216 BC, Rome replaced the cautious Fabius with two consuls who promised the people decisive victory. They assembled the largest Roman army ever put in the field, 80,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry. They outnumbered Hannibal 2-1. They chose flat ground at Cannae where Roman numbers would tell. They were going to end this. They had no idea they were about to participate in the most perfectly executed tactical operation in the history of warfare. Hannibal's plan at Cannae was simple in concept and almost impossibly difficult in execution. He placed his weakest troops, Gallic and Spanish infantry, in the center, in a convex formation that bulged toward the Romans. His strongest African veterans he placed on the wings. His devastating Numidian cavalry he positioned on one flank, his heavier Spanish and Gallic cavalry on the other. The plan was this: let the Romans push forward and crush the center. The center would bend but not break. The wings would hold. The cavalry would destroy the Roman cavalry on both flanks. Then the wings would turn inward. The Romans would be surrounded. Completely. With no escape. It worked exactly as planned. The Roman center pushed forward, the Gallic and Spanish infantry bent back, and the Romans poured into what they thought was a breaking enemy line. The cavalry destroyed the Roman horsemen on both flanks and swept around behind the army. The African veterans on the wings turned inward. The encirclement closed. 70,000 Romans died in a single afternoon, crushed so tightly together they could not raise their weapons to fight back, dying in a mass so dense that the dead held the dying upright. Cannae remains one of the bloodiest single days in military history. And it was not an accident. It was a masterpiece. The news of Cannae broke Rome's confidence but not Rome's will, and that distinction saved the city. The Senate refused to ransom the prisoners Hannibal offered to return. They refused to discuss peace terms. They raised new legions from boys too young to fight and slaves who were not legally soldiers. They sent word to their allies that Rome would not surrender. And critically, perhaps most critically, they refused to allow anyone to mention surrender or defeat in public. The word was banned. The Romans were extraordinary in this way. They could absorb losses that would have destroyed any other nation and keep fighting. After Cannae, city after city in southern Italy defected to Hannibal. Capua, the second largest city in Italy, opened its gates. Several Samnite tribes switched sides. Philip V of Macedon offered an alliance. Syracuse in Sicily joined Carthage. Hannibal had done something no enemy of Rome had ever achieved: he had cracked the alliance system that was Rome's true source of strength. If enough Italian cities defected, Rome would be isolated and strangled. He was very close to winning the entire war without ever attacking Rome itself. But the defections were not enough. Most of Rome's Latin allies stayed loyal, bound by decades of shared citizenship, legal rights, and genuine integration into the Roman system. Without the Latin heartland, without the northern Italian cities, without a port on the Italian coast to receive reinforcements from Carthage, Hannibal's position, brilliant, undefeated, dominant, was strategically hollow. He controlled the south of Italy. He could not control the outcome of the war. He had won every battle. He was losing the war. After Cannae, the war entered a new phase. The Romans adopted the strategy of Fabius, avoiding pitched battle, harassing Hannibal's foraging parties, picking off isolated detachments, besieging the cities that had defected to Carthage. Hannibal could beat any Roman army in the field. The Romans stopped giving him Roman armies in the field. He spent years marching through southern Italy, winning skirmishes, raising rebellions, waiting for the reinforcements from Carthage that never came. Carthage failed him. The city's politicians were divided, cautious, and unwilling to commit the resources that could have turned his victories into total war. His brother Hasdrubal marched a relief army from Spain across the Alps, replicating the impossible crossing, but was intercepted and killed before reaching Hannibal. His first news that his brother was dead came when a Roman soldier threw Hasdrubal's severed head into the Carthaginian camp. Hannibal looked at it and said, "I see there the fate of Carthage." He already knew how it would end. While Hannibal waited in Italy, a young Roman general named Publius Cornelius Scipio was studying him. Studying his tactics at Trebia, at Trasimene, at Cannae. Learning from every battle Hannibal had won. Scipio understood that the way to beat Hannibal was not to face him in Italy. It was to threaten Carthage itself, forcing Hannibal to abandon his Italian campaign and fight on ground of Rome's choosing. He took an army to North Africa. The trap was set. In 203 BC, Carthage recalled Hannibal from Italy. He had been there for 15 years, undefeated in every engagement, but the city he had been fighting for was now threatened by Scipio's army in North Africa. He sailed home. He had not seen Carthage since he was a boy. He arrived to find a city that was grateful for his return but could not give him what he needed, a veteran army comparable to what he had commanded in Italy. He was given raw troops and soldiers he had never drilled. He prepared as best he could. At Zama in 202 BC, he met Scipio. Zama was Hannibal's masterpiece, and his defeat. He tried every tactical innovation he had. He sent the war elephants forward first to break Scipio's formation. Scipio had anticipated it and trained his men to open lanes for the elephants to pass through harmlessly. He tried to replicate the double envelopment of Cannae. Scipio had studied Cannae and countered it. For the first and only time in Hannibal's career, he faced a general who had done his homework. The Roman and Numidian cavalry destroyed the Carthaginian flanks. The line broke. Hannibal's first defeat was also his last battle as a Carthaginian general. After Zama, Hannibal and Scipio met privately. Ancient sources describe the conversation between the two greatest generals of the age with something approaching reverence. Scipio asked Hannibal who he considered the greatest commander in history. Hannibal said Alexander the Great first, Pyrrhus second, himself third. Scipio asked, "Where would you rank yourself if you had beaten me at Zama?" Hannibal replied, "Above all of them." It was the most honest self-assessment ever made by a defeated general. Scipio reportedly smiled. He understood exactly what he had done to earn that answer. After Zama, Hannibal entered Carthaginian politics and proved himself as capable an administrator as he had been a general. He reformed Carthage's corrupt financial system, found enough money to pay the Roman war indemnity, and rebuilt the city's economy with impressive speed. Rome, watching his success with alarm, demanded his surrender. Hannibal fled rather than submit, going first to King Antiochus III of Syria, then to King Prusias of Bithynia, always advising Rome's enemies, always planning, never conceding that the war was truly over. Rome hunted him for decades. He was too dangerous to leave alive, even in old age, even in exile, even without an army. His reputation and his mind made him a threat that Roman strategists could not dismiss. When Roman agents finally tracked him down in Bithynia and his last escape route was closed, Hannibal took the poison he had carried for exactly this possibility. He was approximately 64 years old. His last words, according to the sources, were characteristically composed. "Let us relieve the Romans of their anxiety about an old man." 50 years after his death, Rome destroyed Carthage completely. They razed the city to the ground, killed or enslaved the population, and, according to legend, salted the earth so nothing would grow. Modern archaeology suggests the salting was symbolic rather than literal, but the destruction was absolute. A city that had existed for 600 years was erased. Why? Because the city that had produced Hannibal Barca could not be allowed to exist. That is the measure of what one man meant to the greatest empire on earth. They were still afraid of him, 50 years after his death. Cannae is still taught in every serious military academy on earth. The double envelopment, drawing the enemy forward into a weakening center while the flanks hold and then turn inward to complete encirclement, has been attempted by commanders ever since. At the Battle of Tannenberg in 1914, the German generals von Hindenburg and Ludendorff explicitly modeled their encirclement of the Russian Second Army on Cannae, killing or capturing 300,000 Russians. They had copies of ancient accounts of the battle in their command post. The list of commanders who studied Hannibal reads like a who's who of military history. Julius Caesar, Napoleon Bonaparte, the Duke of Wellington, Erwin Rommel, Norman Schwarzkopf. Each found something different in Hannibal's campaigns, in his logistics, his psychology, his use of intelligence, his ability to combine different military arms into a unified tactical instrument. He invented nothing in isolation. But he combined everything better than anyone before or since. His campaigns were a complete education in the art of war, written in the blood of Roman legions. He pioneered the use of combined arms warfare, integrating heavy infantry, heavy cavalry, light cavalry, and war elephants into a single coordinated system where each element supported the others. He used terrain as a weapon, always fighting on ground of his choosing where his strengths were maximized and Roman advantages were neutralized. He used psychology systematically, understanding that fear, surprise, and the erosion of confidence were as decisive as physical force. He was not just a great tactician. He was the theorist of a complete approach to war. What is often lost in the catalogue of battles is the human quality that made Hannibal's campaigns possible. He kept a multinational army, speaking at least 6 languages, following different gods, from different cultures with different traditions, together, loyal, and effective for 15 years in enemy territory, cut off from reinforcement and resupply. This required leadership of an extraordinary kind. His soldiers adored him. Men who had every reason to desert, to sell their loyalty to Rome for safe passage home, did not. They stayed because of him personally. Ancient sources describe him as physically fearless, always in the thick of the fighting, always visible to his men, sharing their hardships rather than commanding from safety. He was wounded multiple times. He lost an eye to illness crossing the Italian marshes. He wore wigs and disguises to move undetected among his own army and among enemies, gathering intelligence personally. He spoke multiple languages fluently. He knew his soldiers' names. He was, in the most literal sense, a soldier's general, and his soldiers knew it and fought accordingly. His political intelligence matched his military genius. He systematically released Italian allies captured from Roman armies, without ransom, with gifts, with a message that Carthage was not fighting them but Rome. He was trying to build an Italian coalition that would detach Rome's allies permanently. It almost worked. The social and political architecture he built in southern Italy lasted for years after his military position deteriorated. He understood that wars are won politically as well as militarily, a lesson that, ironically, Scipio had learned partly from studying him. The Romans feared Hannibal so completely that the phrase Hannibal ad portas, Hannibal at the gates, became the Roman expression for the worst possible emergency. For generations after his death, Roman politicians used the phrase to galvanize action, to cut through debate, to make people understand that the situation was desperate. His name was a psychological weapon that outlasted his body by centuries. No enemy of Rome, not the Gauls who had sacked Rome, not Pyrrhus who had defeated Roman armies, achieved that kind of permanent grip on Roman imagination. At Cannae today there is a small monument on an agricultural plain in Apulia. Farmers grow wheat where 70,000 Romans died in an afternoon. Archaeologists still find bronze arrowheads and sword fragments in the soil. Every few years, someone's plow turns up a Roman helmet or a piece of armor. The battle left so many dead that the site has never been fully excavated. The land is still giving back the evidence of what one man's mind did there on a summer afternoon in 216 BC. Hannibal Barca. The boy who swore an oath at 9 years old and spent his life keeping it. The general who crossed the Alps with war elephants and shattered Rome's armies for 15 years on Roman soil. The commander who never lost a battle in Italy and lost the war anyway, not to a better general, but to a better nation, one that could absorb losses that would have destroyed any other people on earth. He died in exile, alone, by his own hand, rather than give Rome the satisfaction of his surrender. They destroyed his city 50 years after his death because they could think of no other way to be sure he was truly gone.